50 megawatts, 90 days, 18 billion CFA francs. Burkina Faso has opened the Pabre thermal plant, completed faster than its original contract allowed. On paper, it looks like a victory over shortages and a step toward energy sovereignty. But a power plant does not create its own fuel. It does not manufacture its own spare parts, strengthen weak transmission lines, or train every engineer needed to keep the generators alive. A country can own the machines and still depend on outsiders for what makes them useful. So did Burkina Faso build energy freedom or a new dependency hidden behind 50 megawatts? Because Pabre was completed in 90 days. The real test begins on day 91. On July 21st, 2026, Burkina Faso officially inaugurated the emergency thermal power plant at Pabre near Ouagadougou. The government presented three numbers as evidence of speed and urgency: 50 megawatts of installed capacity, 18 billion CFA francs in announced cost, 90 days of construction compared with a contractual deadline of 120 days. The plant was built to strengthen the production capacity of Sonabel, Burkina Faso's national electricity company, and to improve the country's power supply. That is the verified surface event. But the wording matters. Pabre is a thermal power plant. It is not a solar park, a hydroelectric dam, or a permanent answer to every weakness in the national grid. And 50 megawatts describes installed capacity, not a guarantee that 50 megawatts will reach consumers every hour of every day. Actual delivery depends on fuel, operating efficiency, maintenance, transmission, substations, distribution lines, and the number of hours each generating unit remains available. A plant can carry a 50 megawatt label while producing less during maintenance, fuel shortages, technical failures, or grid constraints. The inauguration also came 1 hour after the first stone was laid for another thermal project at Ouaga Sud-Est. That future plant is projected at 120 megawatts, with an estimated investment of 133 billion CFA francs. But projected capacity is not operating capacity. Ouaga Sud-Est should therefore be treated as a plan under development, not electricity already available to homes, hospitals, or factories. The Pabre announcement also revealed the political argument behind the investment. Burkina Faso's prime minister said earlier policy had emphasized imported electricity, leaving the country exposed to production problems and supply disruptions outside its control. The new strategy aims to build more generating capacity inside Burkina Faso and move towards strategic autonomy. The government also describes Pabre as the first step in a wider program involving new plants at Bobo Dioulasso, Koudougou, Kaya Komsilga, and Toese, with announced additional capacity exceeding 220 megawatts over the coming period. That is an important shift. Producing more electricity domestically can reduce exposure to failures in neighboring systems and give national operators more control over dispatch. But domestic generation does not automatically mean domestic control of the complete energy chain. The available public announcement does not establish the plant's long-term capacity factor, its fuel cost per kilowatt hour, its future maintenance expenses, or how much it will reduce outages across different regions. It also does not fully explain where every critical component comes from, how much fuel can be stored, how many local technicians can perform major repairs, or whether specialized parts remain dependent on a single outside supplier. Those are not arguments against Pabre. They are the measurements required to determine what Pabre actually changes. The country has added a real generating asset. The next question is whether that asset can deliver affordable, reliable electricity after the ceremony, the construction deadline, and the first public claims of success. To understand that, we must look beyond the generators and follow every dependency required to keep them running. A power plant is only one link in a much larger energy chain. For Pabre to deliver useful electricity, fuel must arrive. It must be stored safely. Engines must convert it into mechanical force. Generators must convert that force into electricity. Transformers must raise the voltage. Transmission lines must carry the power. Substations must manage it. distribution networks must deliver it to homes, hospitals, workshops, and factories. If one link fails, the 50 megawatt promise can disappear. Begin with fuel. A thermal plant does not run on political will. It runs on a physical supply that must be purchased, transported, stored, and protected from disruption. Where does that fuel come from? Who supplies it? In which currency is it paid? How many days can Pabre operate if deliveries stop? What happens when international oil prices rise, transport routes are interrupted, or government finances come under pressure? Domestic electricity can still be powered by an international supply chain. That does not make domestic generation meaningless. It means energy sovereignty cannot be measured only by where the generator stands. It must also be measured by how exposed the plant remains to suppliers, prices, transport corridors, and foreign exchange. Then come the machines themselves. Large thermal generators depend on filters, lubricants, sensors, control systems, cooling equipment, electrical protection devices, and specialized replacement parts. Some components may be inexpensive, others may be difficult to source quickly. A small missing part can stop a large unit. The real capability test is therefore not whether Burkina Faso workers can operate the plant during normal conditions. It is whether local engineers can diagnose faults, perform major maintenance, replace critical components, and restore generation without waiting indefinitely for an outside specialist. Who owns the technical manuals? Who controls the software? Are spare parts stored inside Burkina Faso? Can local companies eventually repair or manufacture more of what the plant consumes? These questions determine whether knowledge remains after the contractor leaves. The next dependency is the grid. Electricity produced at Pabre does not move directly into a household socket. It must pass through transformers, high-voltage lines, substations, local distribution networks, and Sonabel's control system. If transmission capacity is weak, part of the new generation may remain trapped near the plant. If substations are overloaded, voltage may become unstable. If local transformers fail, neighborhoods can still lose power, even while the generators continue running. Generation without transmission is power trapped behind the plant gate. Dispatch also matters. Operators must decide which generating units run when demand peaks and which areas face cuts when supply remains insufficient. New capacity can improve the balance, but it cannot eliminate shortages if demand grows faster than the system. There is also a difference between installed capacity and actual production. 50 megawatts is the plant's stated maximum capacity under defined conditions. It does not reveal how many hours the units operate, how much fuel they consume, how often they stop, or how much electricity reaches the grid over a month or a year. A plant that operates continuously and a plant that runs only during emergencies may carry the same capacity label while producing very different amounts of electricity. That is why performance must be measured in more than megawatts. The public needs operating hours, electricity generated, fuel consumed, outages, maintenance time, and cost per kilowatt hour. Without those numbers, a country may celebrate owning the generator while remaining dependent on nearly everything that makes the generator useful. And even if every engine runs, every spare part arrives, and every transmission line holds, one political question remains. Who receives the new electricity first? 50 megawatts sounds like a national resource. But electricity changes lives only after someone decides where it flows, when supply is limited, and which users receive protection from outages. Pabre enters a system with competing demands. Households need lighting, refrigeration fans, phone charging, and enough stability for children to study at night. Hospitals need continuous power for surgery, laboratory equipment, oxygen systems, vaccine storage, and emergency care. Water services need electricity for pumping, treatment, and distribution. Small businesses need machines to run long enough to earn income. Then come the larger users. Food processing plants need reliable electricity to mill grain, preserve meat, cool vegetables, and package products. Manufacturers need predictable voltage to protect equipment and meet delivery schedules. Mines and other industrial operations can consume large amounts of power, but they may also generate export revenue, taxes, and employment. Every group can make a legitimate claim. The allocation question is not simply who deserves electricity. It is how Burkina Faso balances immediate human needs with the productive uses that could expand the economy and finance future capacity. Prioritizing industry can create jobs and reduce imports, but households cannot be asked to remain in darkness indefinitely while factories receive protected supply. Prioritizing households may improve daily life, but unreliable industrial power can keep domestic production expensive and force the country to import goods it could eventually make itself. That is why the new 50 megawatts cannot be judged only by the national total. The real test is where outages fall after Pabre enters the system. Does supply improve mainly around Ouagadougou because Pabre is located near the capital? Do regional towns receive stronger service? Are rural communities limited by weak local lines and transformers, even when national generation rises? Which areas remain the first to be disconnected when demand exceeds supply? Geography can become an invisible gatekeeper. A village may exist inside a country with more generating capacity and still receive little benefit because the final distribution network does not reach it reliably. Price creates another gate. More domestic generation does not automatically mean cheaper electricity. A thermal plant must purchase fuel, transport it, maintain engines, replace parts, and pay operators. If those costs are high, Sonabel may absorb losses. The state may provide subsidies, or consumers may face higher tariffs. The burden will not fall equally. A large company may negotiate supply purchase backup systems or pass higher costs into its prices. A small workshop may lose an entire day of income after one outage. A low-income household may reduce consumption even when electricity is technically available. This is where Pabre connects directly to Burkina Faso's wider self-reliance strategy. Rehabilitated dams can hold water. Irrigation pumps need electricity. Farmers can produce more grain. Mills and food factories need electricity. Cold rooms need electricity. Packaging lines need electricity. Storage and transport systems need reliable power. Water creates agricultural potential. Electricity determines whether that potential becomes industry. So the most important allocation question is not whether homes or factories should always come first. It is whether the system publishes clear priorities, protects essential services, expands regional access, and gives productive users enough reliability to invest without excluding poorer households. The dispatch rules, therefore, matter as much as the generating equipment. When supply is tight, citizens should know which services are protected, which industries receive priority, how emergency cuts are shared, and who reviews those decisions publicly each year. Because once electricity determines who can produce, preserve food, operate machinery, and earn income, the fuel contract stops being a technical detail. It becomes a source of economic power. The generators are visible. The contract's fuel prices, maintenance obligations, and control systems are much harder to see. That is where Pabre could follow two very different futures. In the first future, every critical dependency is documented. Citizens can see who built the plant, who supplied the engines, what fuel the units require, how long warranties last, where replacement parts come from, and which company must respond when a major failure occurs. Sonabel publishes monthly generation operating hours, fuel consumption, outages, maintenance time, and the cost of each kilowatt hour delivered to the grid. Local engineers are not limited to routine operation. Contracts require technical manuals, diagnostic software, training, certificates, spare parts inventories, and supervised major repairs before outside specialists leave. In that future, 18 billion CFA buys more than machinery. It buys knowledge bargaining power and the ability to keep the plant useful. Public reporting would also protect the government's strongest claim. If Pabre genuinely improves reliability Published performance data would allow supporters to demonstrate where outages fell, how much electricity was produced, and whether the cost remained manageable. Without those records, even genuine success can be weakened by suspicion, conflicting claims, and performance numbers that cannot be independently tested after the official public ceremony ends. Now imagine the second future. The plant opens quickly. Cameras show the generators. Officials repeat 50 megawatts. But the public sees little information about the fuel contract, maintenance costs, supplier obligations, or actual monthly output. A specialized component fails. The plant waits for an overseas technician. A software license expires. Replacement parts can be purchased only from one vendor. Fuel prices rise, but the pricing formula remains hidden. The government may still own the plant, while an outside supply chain controls whether it can operate. The public sees the generators. Insiders see the fuel contract. Emergency projects can justify speed. Burkina Faso needed additional power, and rapid construction can prevent real economic losses. But speed can also shorten procurement periods, reduce competition, limit public consultation, and push long-term maintenance questions behind the opening deadline. That does not prove wrongdoing occurred at Pabre. These are governance risks that accompany large, urgent infrastructure projects in Africa, Europe, the United States, and elsewhere. The danger lies in concentrated discretion. One agency selects the project. A procurement office chooses the supplier. A contractor controls technical information. A fuel provider influences operating costs. Plant managers report performance. Regulators approve tariffs. Dispatch operators decide who receives power during shortages. Every stage creates a gatekeeper. Gatekeepers are necessary. Hidden gatekeepers can turn national infrastructure into private leverage. The deepest sovereignty question is therefore not whether Burkina Faso owns the concrete engines and land. It is whether the country controls the knowledge, contracts, fuel, options, spare parts, and data required to keep the plant running. Reducing dependence on imported electricity could strengthen national control. But replacing that dependence with a single foreign fuel route, proprietary equipment, or exclusive maintenance provider would only change the shape of dependence. Changing the source of dependence is not the same as ending it. So the public needs more than another claim of energy sovereignty. It needs mechanisms that reveal who controls each critical link, what the system costs, how the plant performs, and whether Burkina Faso becomes more capable with every year of operation. Because the difference between independence and a new dependency will not be visible at the inauguration. It will be written inside the contracts. Energy sovereignty becomes credible only when the public can test what happens after the plant begins operating. The first mechanism is a public plant ledger. For Pabre, one clear record should identify the total construction costs, the contractor, the equipment suppliers, the financing source, the warranty period, the expected operating life, and every later change to price or schedule. If a major component is replaced, the reason should be recorded. If maintenance costs rise, the explanation should be visible. If the plant operates below expectations, citizens should be able to see the gap between installed capacity and actual delivery. The second mechanism is a fuel dependency dashboard. Each reporting period should show the fuel type, supplier purchase price, transport cost reserve level, and the share of fuel inside the final cost of electricity. The goal is not to publish sensitive security details. It is to reveal whether one supply route, one company, or one currency creates a dangerous concentration of risk. A plant cannot be called strategically secure if a short interruption can force it offline. The third mechanism is a performance scoreboard. Do not measure success only by the 50 megawatt nameplate. Measure electricity generated, hours available hours, stopped, unplanned failures, fuel, consumed, maintenance time, cost per kilowatt hour, and the reduction in outages after Pabre entered the system. Those numbers would allow supporters to prove progress and critics to identify problems before they become another expensive emergency. An independent technical review should verify these figures regularly. Data reported only by the institution operating the plant may leave room for error-selective reporting or political pressure. Verification protects the government when results are real and citizens when they are not. The fourth mechanism is a grid readiness plan. New generation must be matched by transformers, transmission lines, substations, distribution equipment, dispatch capacity and repairs in the areas where outages remain most severe. Generation without transmission is electricity trapped behind the plant gate. If the national grid cannot absorb or distribute the new output, the country may own more capacity while consumers continue experiencing unstable service. The fifth mechanism is a local capability contract. Burkina Faso engineers and technicians should not be trained only to start-stop and monitor the equipment. They should learn fault diagnosis, major maintenance software, operation, safety procedures, parts management, and emergency restoration. Training targets should be written into contracts. Manuals, digital plans, repair procedures, and diagnostic tools should remain inside the country. Local teams should complete supervised major repairs before external specialists withdraw. The sixth mechanism is a maintenance reserve. A defined portion of revenue or public funding should be protected for inspections, spare parts, scheduled overhauls, and emergency repairs. The maintenance plan should exist before the plant is celebrated as a permanent achievement. Otherwise, speed today can become breakdown tomorrow. Together, these mechanisms change the meaning of ownership. Owning the land is not enough. Owning the generators is not enough. Real control means knowing how the system works, having options when suppliers fail, paying predictable costs, and possessing the skills to restore service without waiting for outside permission. A plant creates capacity. A maintenance system creates sovereignty. But the strongest scoreboard will not be found inside Pabre's control room. It will be found outside the plant in the hours of work, healthcare refrigeration, water pumping, and household life that electricity either protects or interrupts. The strongest measure of Pabre will not be the sound of the generators. It will be whether ordinary people notice fewer interruptions in the parts of life that cannot pause. Begin with the household. When electricity fails, the first losses may appear small. A dark room, an uncharged phone, a fan that stops, or food beginning to warm inside a refrigerator. But repeated outages turn inconvenience into cost. Families lose food, children lose study time, and households spend more on batteries, fuel, candles, or private backup systems. If Pabre improves reliability, the benefit should be visible in fewer outage hours, more stable voltage, and lower dependence on expensive alternatives. But reliability without affordability can still exclude the poorest households. If thermal generation raises operating costs, consumers may receive more electricity while paying bills they struggle to afford. Energy access, therefore, has two tests: whether the power arrives and whether families can continue paying for it. Now consider a hospital. Electricity supports operating rooms, laboratory equipment, oxygen systems, sterilization, refrigeration, vaccine storage, blood banks, and emergency care. After dark, backup generators can protect critical services, but they also require fuel, maintenance, and money. A stronger national grid can reduce the number of moments when medical staff must depend on emergency systems. In healthcare, one stable hour of electricity can protect far more than comfort. The small business faces another test. A welder, mechanic, tailor, grain miller, cold storage operator, digital worker, or shopkeeper may earn only when machines are running. An outage can erase working hours, damage equipment, interrupt customer orders, and destroy products that require refrigeration. Large firms may own generators or negotiate protected supply. Small businesses usually have fewer options. For them, electricity is not simply a utility. It is productive time. Then comes agriculture. Burkina Faso can rehabilitate dams, expand irrigation, and increase harvests. But pumps need power, grain mills need power, Cold rooms need power. Packaging lines, slaughter facilities, feed mills, and food processing plants need power. A country may produce more food and still lose value if electricity fails before the product is processed, stored, or transported. Water creates the harvest. Power determines how much of that harvest survives. The same connection applies to drinking water. Treatment plants, boreholes, pumping stations, and distribution systems all depend on electricity. A reservoir can hold water while a community still struggles to receive it because the pumps are silent. 50 megawatts is therefore not only a number, it is time. Hours of work, hours of refrigeration, hours of medical care, hours of water pumping, hours in which a family does not sit in darkness. But these benefits must be measured across regions and income levels, not inferred from activity inside one plant. The final test is simple. After Pabre enters the system, do people work longer, lose less food, receive safer care, access water more reliably, and spend less time adapting to outages? If the answer improves year after year, Pabre becomes more than emergency capacity. It becomes part of ordinary security. And that verdict will depend not on how fast the plant was built, but on what still works after 5 years of fuel costs, heat, maintenance, and rising demand. Burkina Faso has delivered something real at Pabre. A thermal power plant has been inaugurated. Its announced installed capacity is 50 megawatts. The government reports a construction cost of 18 billion CFA francs and says the project was completed in 90 days instead of the 120 days allowed by contract. A separate 120 megawatt project at Ouaga Sud-Est has also been launched, but it remains future capacity, not electricity already serving consumers. That is the first layer, what has been delivered. The second layer is what remains unproven. Publicly available information does not yet establish how many hours Pabre will operate each year, how much electricity it will actually deliver, how often it will stop, what its long-term fuel costs will be, or how much it will reduce outages across Burkina Faso. It also does not yet demonstrate how many major repairs can be completed by Burkinabe engineers, whether critical parts are stored locally, how exposed the plant is to a single supplier, or whether added generation will remain affordable for households and businesses. Those results should be measured, not assumed. The third layer is the 5-year test. Will Pabre still deliver reliable power after years of heat fuel price volatility, maintenance cycles, and rising demand? Will Sonabel publish output outage fuel and cost data? Will local technicians control more of the system? Will regional towns, hospitals, water services, farms, and small businesses experience fewer interruptions? A country can reduce dependence on imported electricity while remaining exposed to imported fuel. The source changes, but the vulnerability may survive inside a different contract or supplier. That is where speed becomes sovereignty or fails to. Burkina Faso deserves credit for adding generation quickly during an energy shortage. Building domestic capacity can reduce exposure to failures outside the country and support a wider strategy of agriculture processing and industrial production. But speed is not sovereignty. Sovereignty begins when a country can finance, fuel, operate, repair, and expand its energy system without surrendering control of its most critical links. Pabre was built in 90 days. The real question is whether Burkina Faso can keep it powerful for the next 20 years. Tell us what country you are watching from. Share your verdict and subscribe as we track what Burkina Faso announces, builds, and proves in ordinary life. Because the strongest power plant is not the one that opens fastest. It is the one the nation can still control when the cameras leave. Disclaimer, this video is fictional storytelling created for education, commentary, and entertainment. It is not a factual report or official information. Any similarities to real events are coincidental. Please enjoy it as creative content only.